Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Watch No Evil. This is Matt.
And this is Zach.
And today we will be taking a look at the 1992 Clive Barker-produced film Candyman, featuring Tony Todd as the titular character, and following Helen Lyle, a semiotics graduate student in Chicago, researching urban legends. Now, while she's in Chicago, she decides to go to a place called Cabrini Green, a housing project in an urban area of town, and discovers the lore of the Candyman, but quickly finds out that it is not simply a lore, but it is rather a full-fledged mythology that has dire consequences in the real world. Now, Zach, this movie speaks to me as a PhD student. Ask me how.
How does it speak to you as a PhD student, Matt?
I am not good at doing things, and neither is Helen Lyle.
Wow, that was far more generalized than I was expecting.
It's so funny to me because she's a PhD student and she's researching this, and a large part of the movie is centralized around her working on this thesis. But one of the things that we never really get to see is the implication of research past, photographs. And one of the things that I particularly dislike about this movie, or one of the problems that I see with this movie, is there is this racial undertone, which is the centralization of a white female voice. It makes sense in the context of the movie. The Candyman, played by Tony Todd, was a well-educated black man living in the 1800s that impregnated a young white woman, and for that he was essentially lynched. And it's interesting then to see the narrative perspective be central to Helen Lyle, and she is the one that is focused on for the movie. I am not a big fan of using her as sort of the central voice in it, mostly because it tries to treat her like an expert of urban legend and urban mythology and a modern urban folklore. And I think that there's an issue with having her be the sort of expert in an unknown field, and then also having the character of Bernadette, her friend, who is a black woman, be sort of secondary. Even Bernadette is treated with a lesser expertise than Helen.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of an unfair narrative.
That is problematic because, first of all, we don't know her academic background all that well. It's never explicitly stated in any way. We just know that she is an academic and that she is studying this urban folklore, this phenomenon, and it's very mysterious at first. The research aspect of it starts out with her asking the black cleaning ladies at the university about their experience with these murders.
She didn't even want to ask the cleaning ladies. They started by talking to students at the university, which is not a reliable source of information.
And it's not like they even got anything out of that either. And she knows nothing about it. It's just weird. Besides having the main character be white, is there any reason why she had to be the main character? And I get that at the end of the movie, spoilers, she kind of becomes the Candyman.
Mm-hmm.
She's definitely part of the allegory, and she's a surrogate for that white woman that the Candyman fell in love with.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just, like you said, the whole research and academic aspects of it seem really shoehorned in and borderline offensive.
Yeah, the idea of having her as the main character is sort of reparative in that she is meant to be the one that is going to replace the Candyman's lost love interest from when he was alive. And so there is this continuation and development to where she is essentially becoming the Candyman, and he is telling her that she has to, succumb to him. And ultimately she doesn't. She rejects him, and she becomes her own sort of folklore. And I think the end of the movie, when they have all of the people from Cabrini Green come to the funeral, it is supposed to be representative of her becoming the new myth.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's this idea that the Candyman is kept alive by his acolytes, which are supposed to be the people that believe in the myth at Cabrini Green. I think that it's really interesting to have her, this white woman who is largely unafraid of repercussions because she just walks into it like there's no danger at all, or with very little self-regard, and she is largely unaffected by the things that happen. The biggest disparity in the film, I think, is between the Candyman mythos and what we see. In all iterations of the Candyman myth, told by the people at Cabrini Green and by the students and by the maids, is that if you say his name 5 times into the mirror, he will come and kill you. Helen doesn't experience that. Instead, when she says his name 5 times into the mirror, the people around her are the ones murdered. Bernadette never says his name 5 times. The dog doesn't say his name 5 times.
That's true.
The mental health professional at the asylum doesn't say the name 5 times. It really is this sort of personification of the myth, but we know that Candyman is real, or at least through the eyes of the unreliable narrator that is Helen Lyle, perceived as being real.
Yeah, I think for the purposes of the plot, since Helen serves as the surrogate for the Candyman's former lover, I think that she's kind of like been chosen and kind of spared from that usual consequence of saying his name 5 times. And it's a different kind of summoning in her case. I have a couple other issues with this. and that is, why is he called the Candyman? Is it ever said?
I think that part of it is the honey motif, because the writing on the wall says sweet to the sweet. I think it was literally because they took his body and they covered him in honey. The other reason is because they gave him offerings of candy, which we only get to see really briefly when Helen goes into his sanctum and there is the candy on the ground that has been opened and some of them have razor blades in it.
Yeah, that's a weird detail. At that moment when watching this, I thought we were going to get to know more of like why that is what he had come to be called. And I wish that it was given more of the Conjuring kind of treatment with Bathsheba, for example. You see her as the demon at first, and then they kind of reveal the lore behind her and like, you know, what happened in the history. And I feel like this did the opposite. It was like, let's introduce the legend of the Candyman, and then we're going to have him appear. And you kind of like are waiting for him to appear the whole time, and then there's like the one kind of red herring Candyman who's just kind of like a gang member. Then you're not really given any more information about the Candyman after you see him. I wish we could have gotten his real human name through history. It seems to have been a true legend, so he should have had a real name instead of someone just saying Candyman in front of a mirror. It's just, I have a problem with the Candyman name.
I feel like that gets lost, though. The idea of losing a name sort of is what cements him as a mythological figure. Part of the idea of the Cabrini Green Project's residency is that those people only refer to him as the Candyman because they only know him as that. And it is, in fact, a sort of colonization of explanation that we should learn about his backstory as a son of a slave that became prosperous through mass-producing shoes after the Civil War by the other anthropological investigation done by professors at that university. I think that it's sort of a colonizer aesthetic.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely some historical and social implications in the metaphors here.
Oh yeah, I think that this is an incredibly political film on top of everything else.
Yeah. Well, the fact that they gave it a Chicago setting, and you know, that's what I connect to about this, because I don't live in Chicago, but I live in the suburbs of Chicago. I am very familiar with the area, and Cabrini Green now, like in the 90s when this was made, like, yeah, it truly was like the projects of Chicago. And now like the southern part of Chicago is considered like the bad part of Chicago, and I think this movie shines a light on like what we consider to be the bad parts of cities, and we're really just the gentrified or I guess the consequences of gentrification in these cities. Basically, what I'm describing here is gentrification.
Yeah.
And the consequences of it being minorities are forced into these higher crime rate project areas. And the fact that the Candyman is tied to this area is kind of strange to me because it's just kind of left open-ended. Like, if you're going to make a movie kind of heavily focused on folklore, and then it's like, why not give a little bit more explanation into why, who, where, when? Give us some details more than what we get.
I don't know. I kind of like that it's left open-ended so much, especially because the writing on the wall, that's one of the things that he says, that he is the writing on the wall, and the writing on the wall for Helen at the end is, it was always you. And so there is sort of this idea of the unreliable narrator, I think, being, the central sort of subject. Is the Candyman even real at all? I don't think so.
I think we have two different opinions here, and I think that's why I want more details and you're okay with not having details, because I think that the Candyman was real and that Helen is actually dealing with a paranormal presence, whereas you seem to think, no, it's Helen's psychosis.
Yeah, I'll clarify my statement. I think that the idea, and the reason I think that it is entirely a part of Helen's psychosis, is because when she is being locked up, she sees the Candyman above her, and, she's screaming that he's under the bed. And then we get to see the videotape, and it's not the case. And I know that can very easily be interpreted as, oh, well, it's paranormal, so it's only showing itself to her. But I do think that the writing on the wall, the "it was always you," is a part of that. I think that we're just supposed to be under the belief that she is an unreliable narrator, that we are experiencing this psychosis with her. And that was a trend in film in this time period, and it sort of reminds me of the movie Identity, in the way that it's treating psychosis, even down to when she's taken in front of the psychiatrist and he says that you've been here for months. I don't believe that. I actually think that she thinks that they've been there for months. And so all of those interactions, I don't believe are legitimate. I do believe it is left intentionally vague so that people have these kinds of discussions. Well, is the Candyman real or is he fake? Because the Candyman was being used for an explanation of all of the murders that were occurring at Cabrini Green. So it was producing this mythological figure as a reason for bad things to happen, almost as if it was cursed. But when Helen is the one that said the name and the people around her are the ones dying, I think that that's kind of the explanation, that the mythology is how it's being treated by the community, and that's why she's representative of the psychosis element. She's the one committing these things in a split personality.
I do like that element that it's up to interpretation, though. And there are elements where it makes me question if the Candyman is truly just legend or if there is some kind of paranormal haunting kind of thing going on, or even possession at some point because of the whole dog thing and the kidnapping.
The sequels solidify that answer, but in this movie, which I'm going to say we should leave this movie untouched from the nature of the sequels.
Okay, so I haven't seen the sequels, so I guess when you make a sequel of a film of this nature where you have that kind of open-endedness, you kind of have to commit one way or the other. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you're very limited in what you can do with the plot moving forward. Oh,
and just for your clarification, they commit hard to the Candyman as a real thing that is killing people.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
okay,
they don't.
So
it's not a psychosis thing. It is he's real. In the same way that, Michael Myers sort of becomes a figure of an immortal cursed deity in the later Halloween films, that is totally separate from what we see him in the original.
These movies that have recurring kind of slasher, seemingly immortal, legendary killers, like Candyman, like Freddy Krueger, the one you just said, Halloween, where they're killed over and over and over, but they always come back and do more killing. I think a lot of them do play off of this urban folklore kind of idea of there's always this scapegoat. There's always this idea that the explanation is something more complicated and more convoluted and actually scarier and more unavoidable than what it actually is. And I think that's human nature. Of some of us think of the worst possible situation, and I think this is a manifestation of that. Is, no, murder rates in Chicago aren't just high because people are killing each other more here and there's just more people in gang violence. No, it's because the Candyman's here, and that's he's the one driving up the murder rates and the crime rates. And we come up with these explanations to both make ourselves feel better, but also to deny the
class struggle.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what's at play here. It's a really convenient explanation.
And we get to see the closest physical representation of the Candyman when Helen is attacked in that bathroom, which is to say a person who calls himself the Candyman. He takes on the moniker and he has the hook, and he is sort of that violent figure, but he's real. We know that he is in fact a real person that is doing this.
I just want to hear the rest of your theory here, that it's due to Helen's psychosis. So what do you think triggers that psychosis in Helen?
There's two little bits to it that I think triggered it. One, the conversation with her husband and the other professor, where she says, "We're gonna bury you." And then he goes, "Did you even read the paper that I wrote on Candyman?" I also think the moment that she starts to realize that her husband is having an affair triggers it. We get the sense that she knows that he's having an affair fairly early in the movie. It's from after that point that we start to actually see the impact.
Yeah, I think if there was some psychosis element to it and it was just Helen the whole time, I think it would be, the kind of that psychotic break of jealousy and anger and betrayal.
And being physically attacked by a gang member.
That could have been the last straw, because nothing really terrible happened before that.
Yeah.
I mean, they mentioned the one, what's the kid's name? Jake. It's Jake.
Yeah.
Jake, the little boy who kind of tells her what he knows about it, and about that one boy being emasculated in that public bathroom that then she gets attacked in. Do you think that was the guy who attacked her that did that, or if that was the legendary Candyman?
I think that it's just another story in the same vein as the beginning, when they're talking about one of the students is telling the story of the babysitter who's gonna cheat on her boyfriend, and they both say Candyman 4 times into the mirror, but then she says it the 5th time. And so then, the Candyman kills her and the baby. There's no merit to that. Even though it shows it, I think that it's supposed to be the playing out of the mythos. And I think that it's the same with Jake's story. I think that it's a horror story to tell kids to scare them.
The story got told once, and then people have kind of manipulated it in their own ways to fit their own settings. Although, it is interesting that I forgot about that story at the very beginning where they introduced the legend with the one girl cheating on her boyfriend with the other guy. It's a similar dynamic as what's going on with Helen and Trevor, and Helen does mention that she wants a baby, and then she is then later accused of taking Anthony.
I think that is an extension of the pregnancy of the white woman that the Candyman impregnated. It sort of goes along with, it's he's trying to reclaim what was his or what was lost, which was the white woman and his child.
It's a surrogate. You know, just like Helen is. It's interesting because it's just another thing that blurs the lines between, is this legend or is this a serial killer thing? Because serial killers, if you ever watched a bunch of Criminal Minds episodes, it's surrogacy is what drives, in the serial killer world, and not just in Criminal Minds, which is fiction, I know that, but in the real world too. Think Ted Bundy. He had a type.
Yeah. Ed Gein.
Yeah, they're all surrogates for, usually it's their mother, but for some figure in their life.
You are correct.
Or in their previous life.
Ed Kemp really only killed. He was the co-ed killer because of his mother.
Yep. It blurs that line because it's it could just be, the Candyman trying to fulfill what he lost, or it's a serial killer thing, and they're surrogates in that way. So you could really go either way, and they do such a great job of walking that tightrope throughout the entire movie.
It's a lot to really dig into in terms of what's real, what's not real. And there are, of course, parts to support both. Notably, if she really was in there for a month, then obviously Anthony would have died because, nobody was taking care of it unless there was really a Candyman. That being said, a child is not going to survive on honey. It's just not. Also, don't give your kids honey. Honey is incredibly bad for babies, and they have a higher than normal chance of contracting foodborne illness and dying.
This isn't just a horror podcast. This is educational.
Yeah.
Now you know. Anyways, I'm looking back at my notes here, and I said earlier we're not sure if Candyman died at Cabrini Green. He was stung to death, but then he was burned.
Yes.
And then the legend says that his ashes were spread over Cabrini Green. That's what that one other professor says at that dinner.
That would make sense. Why. It also makes sense why they have the pyre at the end.
That checks out. Mystery solved. It was in the movie the whole time. So let's talk a little bit more about Helen. First of all, Virginia Madsen, great acting.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll be crucified for saying this, but I think just as good of a job acting Jodie Foster in Silence of the Lambs. I think she did a great job with kind of having to act a little bit psychotic at times, but also denying that psychosis. It was very believable, and if a lesser acting performance had been present, it wouldn't have been as, I don't think that line would have been as blurred as it was.
The fact that you have such a strong lead and somebody who is able to demonstrate that significant of an emotional range, I think is incredibly important. And in fact, I would say that as far as acting goes, pretty much everybody in this film pulls their weight, except for the one news reporter after Helen gets released for the murder of the dog and Anthony. That actress was not good. And it was
I don't remember.
Significant enough that I wrote it down.
I don't see that one. I must have been writing something else down at that moment because I don't remember that.
But everybody else is a good actor.
The mistress, I don't know.
We didn't really get to see her act but also how would you have reacted? That one, I'm going to give her a pass. She acted the way that I would imagine a young adult woman would act in the face of seeing her husband's psychotic ex-wife. And by ex-wife, I mean soon-to-be ex-wife.
But anyways, back to Helen. I like how initially they make her out to be this, the academic skeptic of the legend. And she, that starts with her demonstrating the whole, medicine cabinet thing where you can, push it out into the next unit. The murderer comes in through there. And it's, one, really cool idea. But also, it kind of spurs on this skepticism that you see in Helen. And then she starts getting into the research, and you always get the, you talked about earlier, that she has no sense of self-preservation. And she gets so invested in her research, at that project in Cabrini Green. She's going about it in a very factual kind of way. It makes you feel like she's going to come to this conclusion to, reasonably explain with facts what's going on. And that derails.
It was right after she saw the Candyman in the garage. Candyman says that he has to shed innocent blood to stay alive, and then Helen blacks out and wakes up in Anne-Marie's apartment.
So then it kind of derails after that, because then, that would be shocking to anyone. To have to go through that. So you get the impression that she's not really going after her facts anymore, or even her thesis. So it's just interesting how you get that transformation and that kind of reversal, because there are a lot of role reversals in this. For example, the whole Candyman legend is based off of, angry mob goes and kills black man.
Yeah.
And then in this movie, there's not really any impregnating that happens, but at the end of the movie, a mob of black people burns what they think is the Candyman, but is actually a white woman with a baby.
Yeah, it's also interesting that she essentially delivers the child.
That is true.
By coming out of this pyre and symbolically giving birth and then giving back to the community, being Anne-Marie.
And that's after she kind of takes on the mantle of being the Candyman. Like, she has the meat hook in her hand, and that's what Jake sees when she's going into that pyre.
Like I said, it's partially, I guess, this idea of reparation. There's this problem with the movie in that it only shows most black people in the sort of despondence and living in the projects, with Bernadette being sort of the only exception. And there is this disconnect between the female figure of Anne-Marie and the female figure of Bernadette, because even Bernadette, I think that it is sort of supposed to be indicative of this class difference or class struggle, which is also seen a little bit in the lore about the Candyman. He had risen above his station and would be then killed by the other white people around him. Would it be for having risen above his station and being of equal level to love and marry and impregnate a white woman? Possibly. That could be sort of another treatment of it, where we then get to see that same thing sort of happen to Bernadette, who rises above how we see every other character in this movie. Which is why I think that it is a little bit problematic. And actually, it's interesting because they talk about the thesis, right? They talk about their thesis. They're working on it together. In almost every review that I watched of this movie or read about this movie, they refer to it as Helen's thesis. And one of them, I watched the Kill Count, which is a YouTube channel with James A. Janice, and it's on Dead Meat, is the name of the channel. He refers to Bernadette as a friend of Helen's, which is true, but they leave out the fact that Bernadette is of equal caliber with Helen. She is also a PhD student. She is also working on this as her thesis project. So I think that there is this sort of centralization of the white voice that has resonated further than just the movie itself, but in how people analyze the movie, which I think is a problem.
Yeah, definitely. So Bernadette as a character is kind of interesting because she's like the cautious friend that's also, you get the impression that she's less of a skeptic, but still kind of on that side of things. And her being a black character, she is, and I don't want to come off the wrong way with this, so she is of lighter skin tone than the other black characters in the movie.
You are absolutely correct in identifying an issue that was prevalent in just Hollywood film, which is colorism.
She's what they would have called less black at that point in time, so then she is given a primary role, or not a primary role, but a secondary role in the movie. Not as she could have been a primary role.
That is a prominent issue in films of the 90s, with light-skinned black people being portrayed in higher status roles and darker black-skinned people being portrayed as gang members or troublemakers. It's still a problem in Hollywood media, though. It's I think obviously
definitely still present.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. I do think that is part of it. And I mean, this whole movie is such a difficult one to talk about because, yes, it has a lot to do with class struggle and mythology, and there are a lot of problematic elements in it if analyzed through this way, but it's also like a good movie.
It is a good movie. It's got a lot of social commentary, and it's impossible to discuss this movie and not talk about race in this way. And, if you are offended by our way of handling this, like, it is difficult. We're doing our best here to try not to be offensive in any way. But yeah, it's part of the commentary of the film, but also a problem within the making of the film, which is it's just so unique.
And if I were to cite a lot of the sources, so for example, my idea of like colonization through explanation and the idea of reparation or the reclaiming of land, it's because I have been reading Tucker and Yang's article, Colonization is Not a Metaphor. And I've also been reading the Sorrentino in response to that, which is colonization is only metaphor. So it's in a difficult spot right now.
Yeah. Sociology and anthropology and and all that. It can get very hairy very quickly.
Yeah, I think this is a great movie. Like, you said it too. You would put it on par with Silence of the Lambs. I would too. Mm-hmm. I think that it is an excellently directed movie, and I think that the characters have a lot of pathos and nuance, and Tony Todd is incredible as the Candyman.
Yes.
He's an interesting villain.
This is the first of our episodes in February, which we are trying to highlight films made by or featuring Black filmmakers or actors. And that's for Black History Month. And yeah, I do believe that this is on par with Silence of the Lambs. I think it's just as good. And I think the only reason it's not as famous is because it does deal with race rather than just a serial killer.
Yeah, and especially at a time when it was particularly volatile to even bring it up in media. We're gonna see more of these types of movies, I think, when we talk about Jordan Peele movies coming up too. And also it's of course good for us to mention it because I know that you're excited for, but I'm incredibly excited for the Jordan Peele production of Candyman, which is supposed to come out later this year. It's being directed by Nia DaCosta, who is the person that is directing the sequel to Captain Marvel as well. She's like the youngest director to direct a Marvel film. Yeah. She was born in 1989, Zach. Doesn't that make you feel like garbage?
Yep, that makes me feel like I'm doing nothing with my life. But yeah, we are very excited for the Jordan Peele Nia Acosta, I guess, spiritual successor to Candyman. That's what they're calling it.
I know, but it looks like it's going to be a sequel.
It's strange.
I'm ready for it. It doesn't matter. Tony Todd's in it.
Yeah, they have Tony Todd and Virginia Madsen in it, assuming their roles as they had it in this movie. It's got to be something like a sequel, right?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. I think it's going to be Anthony grown up.
Yeah, I mean, it looks very good. We're excited. And anything that Jordan Peele puts his hands on is very good.
Listen, Zach, this is just a sequel. The girl who played Anne-Marie McCoy is also reprising her role in this movie.
Okay.
It's a sequel.
You know what they're probably doing? They're probably doing like what they did with Halloween. Or whatever year that came out, 2018. Mm-hmm. They're probably just doing the same.
They bring back everybody 20 years later.
Almost 30 years later, Matt.
Almost 30 years later. That's wild. God
yeah, isn't that
damn.
crazy?
I am so excited.
Yeah, so it'll be good. We will be watching it probably. Well, it's probably not going to go to theaters, so I guess we got to get HBO Max, huh?
Yeah. That's all I had written down and all of the articles I had read.
What's specifically tough with this one, like with Get Out and Us, it's more about like the identity of race, whereas this one, it's like, this one deals much more directly with racism and kind of dealing with like the abuse of the separate but equal idea, because like gentrification is literally separate but not equal, because you're going to get this other part of the city that's not as nice, not as equal to our nice, Sears Tower, cutting edge Chicago life that we have here.
Yeah, for sure.
So, it's bad. Don't be racist. Let's do some trivia and lighten things up here. And this is to be or not to be.
Oh, God damn it.
Hey, this joke's even better than you think.
Yeah, okay.
Just wait. All right, so first question. How many times was Tony Todd stung by bees in the making of this film?
182.
Whoa. No.
6. What? You asked.
It's just such a big difference. 23.
Okay. Well, I was close.
You weren't, but then you were. Anyways, interesting fact to go along with that is that Tony Todd actually negotiated in his contract. He said
like $1,000 for every bee sting, right?
That's exactly what it was.
$183,000. If I could get $1,000 for every bee sting that I suffered, do you know how many bee stings I would suffer, Zach?
Enough to become the Candyman.
At least 6.
Next question. Which element in the movie was inspired by real murders in Chicago? And this is multiple choice. So we got A, the razor blades hidden in the candy. B, the medicine cabinets being a secret point of entry into an apartment. C, a meat hook being used as a trademark murder weapon. Or D, a mob of people covering a maimed man in the honey from a beehive so that the bees would sting him to death.
That's interesting. Initially, my thought was it would have to be the razor blades in the candy, because I know that was a whole thing that happened before.
Let's say it's inspired directly to the movie. Because all of these have happened before, except maybe the last one.
Yeah. C?
No, it was actually B. There was actually a spur of murders in Chicago where people were popping those medicine cabinets out from the other side of the wall to then murder their neighbors. So
interesting.
And I think that's actually the most interesting one.
Yeah, for sure. And the whole plot of the movie kind of hinges on it.
Right. And that's just like one of the most interesting parts of the movie. It's like, whoa, that was real. Now it's more interesting, and now I'm more scared about apartments in Chicago. But they probably fixed most of them, right?
Yeah, I would assume that they probably did something about that.
All right, next question. Who was the second choice for Helen's character if Virginia Madsen had rejected the role?
Who was the second choice?
I'll give you a hint. We like her.
Sandra Bullock.
Yeah, Sandra Bullock. I feel like she would have done a great job too.
Yeah. I'd like to see Sandra Bullock as a serial killer.
I'm going to skip the next. Well, no, the next one's interesting because it's Philip Glass. And I just gave away the answer. Philip Glass was actually like really disappointed in how the film turned out because he thought it was going to be more true to Clive Barker's original short story. And he watched it, and he's like, it turned out like a low budget slasher film.
Right.
But over time, he has kind of come around to appreciate it more, mostly because he keeps making money off of it. So.
Listen, I've said it before. Mariah Carey could do Akhenaten, but should Philip Glass have done Akhenaten?
No. Right?
Nothing brings me more joy than making up jokes about other musicians being able to do what Philip Glass does.
Well, I mean, for its time, it was like kind of novel, and now it seems very simplistic, but also like you listen to this soundtrack and it's like it's catchy. Last question. Okay, Sweets to the Sweet is written at all the crime scenes. Where does this line come from?
Sweets to the Sweet. My initial thing was like, it's gotta be Shakespeare. It's gotta be like Hamlet. It's gotta be some Shakespeare bullshit.
That is an excellent guess, because that's exactly what it is. It is Shakespeare's Hamlet. Dang, Matt. Which is why the to be or not to be plays so well. Just to, point it out.
To be or not to be? That is the question.
Maybe this movie is just Hamlet. Can we just compare the two plots?
It's not.
But maybe its references to Hamlet inspired the 1994 Lion King film.
Oh God. Okay, well.
You can't deny the connection.
I can, and do, and have.
Well, we need conspiracy theories. We're running out of them.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Watch No Evil. This is Matt.
And this is Zach.
And if you want to know who could take a sunrise, sprinkle it with dew, cover it with chocolate, and a miracle or two, the Candyman can.
Bees.